What is going on, everybody? George back with you again for another one of the Toilets to Titles mid-season review. With me, as always, is my twin brother from another mother, Nino. Nino, how you doing, my brother?
I can't complain. I'm kind of excited to dive into a little Chicago Bears offseason breakdown and see what we got here.
I mean, let's be honest. You can complain, but nobody cares.
Yeah, so. Very true. Very, very true.
Also joining us from Locked On Bears from the Locked On Podcast Network is Mr. Lorin Cox. Lorin, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Always down to talk Bears, of course.
Absolutely. So I kind of gave a little teaser, told everybody that you were from the Locked On Bears. Why don't let's start the show by telling everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and your experience so far.
Yeah, so I've been covering the Bears now. Man, I should have like done the math on this ahead of time, but it's been almost 10 years, I think now. But I've been doing the podcast stuff for a while, and used to work for NBC Sports Chicago, and did some editing in the USA Today network for a little bit, and bounced around here and there. And I still do some grading for Pro Football Focus on the side. So I've always been kind of intimately around the sport and around the team, and keeping tabs on a long near decade of mediocrity. And a blimp of playoffs one time was cool, but it was more fool's gold than anything. So yeah, I'm doing the podcast for 5 years now, and I'm locked on and really enjoying it. And it keeps you busy, helps pay the bills, and it's fun to talk about football 5 days a week.
Yeah, it's literally the dream job. Get paid to talk about football. Like, that's absolutely fantastic. And by the way, I am a Dolphins fan myself. So when you talk about years and years of just mediocrity and like one playoff appearance, I'm right there. We're not going to talk about Nino. Nino, you're not allowed to speak on this because you're a Patriots fan and nobody likes you.
Agreed.
Am I pointing in the right direction? Nino? Right there. Right there. You see?
We
can talk about N'Keal Harry later. It's okay.
Yeah, we'll get there. We will definitely get there. So are you a Bears fan? Because we've had a bunch of people from the Locked On network on these shows. And one thing I've come to find out is just because they cover the team, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a fan of that team.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate that about the Locked On network, is that we get a kind of a mix of that. I don't really describe myself as a fan of the team. I mean, I like when I grew up, I was, but something about kind of covering it so intimately for so long, you lose a little bit of the attraction. Like, of course, like it's more fun when the team is doing well. So like it's in my interest for the team to do well, but I'm not like cheering for them. I'm more interested in like being correct about analysis and being, to provide the best analysis of the team as possible, and being the most sort of accurate and on top of things, more so than like, are they good or not? But it is still my preference that they are better. It makes it's more fun. So it's sort of a mixed answer, but not exactly a fan, but grew up as one.
Okay. Yeah. I can see how it would be a lot better if the team is actually doing good. That definitely makes it more exciting. Last year, the Bears, they were 6-11. They finished third in the NFC North. Can you give us just a brief description of what went right last year, what went wrong last year?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a lot went right. I will say that. I mean, and enough hard to get 6 games, but they beat a lot of the bad teams on their schedule. So it wasn't like they were upsetting anybody or pulling anything off that's wild. A lot went wrong in terms of they claim to have a plan for how to handle the two quarterbacks, Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. And as soon as Andy Dalton got hurt, they didn't seem to have a plan for Justin Fields. So it was very messy across the quarterback situation. The offensive line was fairly messy. The defense was getting older and had some injuries. The defense, all things considered, still played at a decent level, considering how little they were getting from their offense, and just the way that Danny Trevathan was a shell of himself, and Akeem Hicks was a shell of himself, and Khalil Mack was hurt for a lot of the season, and it was pretty much the Robert Quinn show, and then trying to figure out some other pieces around him. So it was very messy. The writing was definitely on the wall for a while with Matt Nagy, and just not being flexible to his players, but really trying to get the players to fit his scheme, because he felt like what his idea was correct and was going to be the right thing, instead of kind of taking what would work best for the players. And there was just an inflexibility there that bent for a while and finally broke last season.
So I don't want to crap on, I don't want to turn this into a crap on Matt Nagy podcast, but that's easy to do.
That happens a lot.
Yes. Do you think like he went into the season with the idea of, okay, my job is on the line this year. And that's why he went with and was pushing to have Andy Dalton be the quarterback, being the established veteran, over, putting his career basically in the hands of a rookie who's completely unproven.
Yeah, it's like there's two schools of thought in that, because I think you're right in the sense that he thought Andy Dalton would give him the best chance to win football games as a proven veteran who's been in the playoffs if you put some supporting cast around him. And Dalton was a better fit for what Matt Nagy wanted to do offensively. So it makes sense that he wanted to prioritize that way. But you could also see it the other way and say, if you had really gone all in on Justin Fields and he had been able to show more promise even than he did last season and look like, on an ascending quarterback, it would be easier to go to ownership and say, hey, like, we only won 6 or 7 games, but that's because we have the rookie. And next year, the rookie's going to be so much better. So, we need another year or two here, like, go all in on the rookie. But instead, he tried to kind of do both because Dalton got hurt. He was all in on Dalton. Dalton gets hurt, puts in Fields, and it's like, oh, hey, wait a minute, the rookie. Remember the rookie? That's why I shouldn't be fired. And it's like, well, you didn't really get enough of either one to justify your job. And ultimately, I think it was what was best for the franchise.
Go ahead, Nino.
Real quick, it seemed like he didn't want to conform to his style of play. He just kept that offense that was intact for Andy Dalton. There was no conforming to anything to make Fields' job easier or learning process easier.
Yeah, that was the most frustrating part. It was like he didn't. We felt like in 2020, the year before, that maybe he had learned his lesson with Mitch Trubisky, because about halfway through 2020, he gave up play calling duties to his offensive coordinator, and they changed the whole scheme. And Trubisky had a decent finish to the season against some bad teams, but like put together a couple of wins there and got an offense going that looked like the most functional they had looked all season. And they go into 2021 and draft Fields. It's like, okay, if they just pick up what they were doing at the end of the last season and with the new scheme, Fields would fit that just fine. But instead, he goes back to the Matt Nagy offense and kind of forgot all the lessons he seemed to have learned from Trubisky. And it's just that stubbornness or inflexibility just ended up being his downfall.
So I have a theory about what happened last year with Allen Robinson. I think like my theory is, he didn't want to be in Chicago. That was evident. He did not want to be there. And the fact that they tagged him, would it be wrong to think that he wasn't giving 100% game in, game out, week in, week out last year? Like, I felt like he was just more going through the motions, just trying to get through the season and not get injured, versus playing like Allen Robinson that we have seen him to play, even with poor quarterback play for most of his career.
Yeah, dating back to college, he's never had like a great quarterback. Yeah, there's a lot of Bears fans that feel very similar to that, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think, yes, there were definitely times when Allen Robinson was not giving 100% effort because, he doesn't want to get hurt entering another free agent offseason, because the last time he was going to be a free agent, he tore his ACL in Jacksonville and then signed with the Bears off of the ACL tear, but cost himself probably some real millions of dollars on that contract. So this season he sees, okay, we don't have anything at quarterback. The offensive line struggling, and this coaching staff is a dead duck. So I'm not going to risk my body all season at full effort on the chance that I might get hurt already having a down season because the quarterback is bad. So like, I think some of it was the system kept asking Allen Robinson to run curl routes and short underneath routes and not really, using him open deep downfield the way he can win all over the field and be an effective route runner. And part of it was was Robinson himself kind of being, not giving 110%. But I think in Los Angeles this year with the Rams, I think he's going to have a huge year and prove a lot of people wrong that are doubting him from last year.
Yeah, so we just did an episode with Jake Bogan from for the Rams, and he made a wild accusation about Allen Robinson. Said he's going to lead the league in receiving yards this year, which I thought was extremely spicy. Is it possible? I mean, yeah, it's possible, but I don't know if he's going to lead the league in yards.
It's definitely that's a bold take for sure. After
Cooper Kupp, very bold, very very bold.
he's still competing with Kupp. I mean, I know Kupp's been hurt, but like there's other good receivers in that Rams offense, and we don't know about Matthew Stafford's elbow, but he has the talent to be a top 5 wide receiver production wise. It's a lot of stiff competition at wide receiver right now. I think he'll be very very good. Maybe not lead the league, but way up there for sure.
I think he'll benefit in the touchdown area. I think he's going to get double-digit touchdowns. I feel 10 or more easily.
Yeah, for sure, not a doubt.
So the Bears they fired Matt Nagy as we've mentioned. They let go of Ryan Pace, and they brought in Ryan Poles and new coach Matt Eberflus. I hope I pronounced his last name.
Eberflus.
Eberflus.
Yeah.
I'm horrible with names, so the fact I was that close, I'm taking it as a win. What can we expect? Like, not necessarily from the GM, because but more so from the coaching staff. Like, what kind of system is that coach trying to implement there?
Yeah, so Eberflus was the Colts defensive coordinator and is going to bring over essentially the same defense he ran there, but he's definitely he's a lot more hands off. He's taken the CEO type role of a head coach. He's not coordinating the defense. He brought over his defensive backs coach, I think, at Indy. Alan Williams is the Bears defensive coordinator, and brought over a couple of the other assistants. But he said, like, all offseason, it's Alan Williams' defense. Like, it's the same system, but it's like it's his defense. It's not my defense. It's really our defense, but he's not hands-on. He's been spending almost more time with the offense than the defense, despite always being a defensive coach in his career. So that scheme's a lot more, cover 2, cover 4, and then, on third down, more like man-to-man and some blitzing here and there, but mostly going to be off-zone coverage with a deep shell to kind of keep things underneath. Not exactly the same kind of cover 2 the Bears used to run under Lovie Smith, but generally from the same type of family. Then offensively, they brought in Luke Getsy as their offensive coordinator, who was Aaron Rodgers' quarterback coach in Green Bay. So he's going to run the Mike LaFleur, the Kyle Shanahan and Mike Shanahan stretch zone offense with play action and rollouts off that. A lot of the things that we wanted to see the Bears offense do for Justin Fields last season that Matt Nagy just refused to implement as a big part of the offense. That seems to be the bread and butter of the scheme they're going to run this year. And they do seem to be very intent on running the ball even more, really trying to be as much of a run-first offense as possible, better down in distance, and then work the play action off of that, move Justin Fields out of the pocket off of that, and keep his job a little more simple.
I had a question. We're just going to roll off your running game statement there. Khalil Herbert or Montgomery? Because the camp I'm hearing that they're very high on Herbert, and that there's a chance it could be a 50-50 split.
It's definitely going to be a bigger split than we've seen in recent years. I mean, I guess last year was Herbert's season, but rookie season, but it's definitely going to be a bigger split than we saw last season. I mean, Montgomery was hurt last season, but when Montgomery was healthy, it was still the David Montgomery show. And I think we're going to see a lot of Khalil Herbert this season. David Montgomery is going to be a free agent after this offseason. So I know, he's trying to build up as much of that rapport as he can and build up his value. But I kind of get the impression that, the new regime sees Khalil Herbert as longer term, the better fit. Montgomery's always been more of like an inside zone kind of cutback runner, and Herbert's more of the stretch zone style of outside zone Shanahan scheme type of running back throughout their careers. Doesn't mean Montgomery's a bad fit or that he's not going to have a good season, but I think they're really going to keep the rotation fresh there, have fresh legs on the field. And I think they also see Herbert as potentially a slightly better receiving threat out of the backfield as well. Although again, I think Montgomery can do it, but I really think they have big expectations for Herbert that might lead to this being Montgomery's last season in Chicago. The other thing there is that Getsy and LaFleur in Green Bay, they did pay Aaron Jones a big contract while they still had A.J. Dillon on his rookie deal. So, like, if Montgomery has a good season and impresses them, I could see him sticking around. But right now, I think my money would say they might let him walk.
I mean, last year, both backs in Green Bay, 8. They were close to 1,000 yards, and they had a lot of receiving yards. So, coming from Green Bay, I can see both of those guys, having a great season. I just feel Khalil, he's on that rookie deal.
He's good, man. He's still really underrated in the NFL.
In that 4-game stretch last year, he blew up.
He looked better than David Montgomery, to be honest. Small sample size, and he's a rookie, but yeah, he's got a bright future.
Nice.
So Nate chimed in. Nate chimed in here with quick passes like the Packers. Hopefully, poor line won't be a big of an issue with the passing game. I feel like the Bears tried to address the offensive line both in free agency and in the draft. They drafted 3 tackles and they signed a center, and they drafted a center in the draft as well. How do you expect that offensive line to look going into the season?
Yeah, I will say, like, entering training camp, it was concern number 1 for me on the whole team. Like, it was there's not a lot of talent there, but like the 2 days before training camp opened, they signed 2 more free agents, Riley Reif from the Bengals, formerly the Lions, and then Michael Schofield, who was a guard for the Chargers for a long time. And all of a sudden, when you sign 2 veteran starters right before training camp, it can really turn around a position pretty quickly there. So I feel a bit better about where they sit now. Still fairly open competitions for the offensive tackle positions, but the interior is pretty set. Cody White here, left guard, Lucas Patrick at center, Michael Schofield at right guard is going to be the case. Lucas Patrick, who they signed from the Packers, same offense, bringing over, broke his thumb at the beginning of training camp and I think he might have had some minor surgery, supposed to be ready for week 1, but going to miss pretty much all of training camp in the preseason. So there might be a little ramp up there. And right now, the winner of their left tackle competition is their rookie 5th-round pick out of Southern Utah. Braxton Jones has been really the surprise of training camp. He's going up one-on-one against Robert Quinn in training camp practice. Robert Quinn had 18.5 sacks last season, and Braxton Jones is beating him. Like, he's not, Robert Quinn's getting some, but like it's a pretty even matchup between a guy who set the Bears franchise or almost set the Bears franchise single season record for sacks versus a 5th-round rookie out of a small school. He's been really, really impressive for them at training camp, to the point where Riley Reif, the veteran who we thought was just going to plug right in at left tackle, they moved him to right tackle because they like the 5th-rounder at left tackle so much. They're going to put the other veteran at right tackle, and that seems to be the starting 5 offensive line, and barring some kind of crazy change. And at the end of the day, it's not going to be a top 5, top 10 offensive line, but I think they can be good enough to get the job done. It won't be stellar, but it won't be a disaster.
Go ahead, Nino.
No, I never meant to talk about the line. I was going to ask about the rest of the offense, but I wanted you to
go for it.
So
go for it.
So let's talk about those wide receivers then. I know it's not the best group, but I obviously Mooney, I think as a young stud in the rise, and he proved last year he can get it done. And I feel he'll improve this year. But the rest of these guys that you got, kind of like piecing it together. I'm a fan of Pringle, and I feel like Pringle could do some big things for you guys this year. He wasn't utilized well in Kansas City because he was like a 5th option. So
yeah,
you guys, he would be a 3rd option because I feel it would be Mooney, Komet, and then whoever. So Harry's got the injury now. You got St. Brown, but St. Brown's got Green Bay ties. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's after Darnell Mooney, it's a wide open competition for sure. And I still don't understand why Darnell Mooney still remains underrated in a lot of the national media. Like that Bears offense last season was terrible, and he still had 1,000 yards, with not much going for him. So I really think he is locked in and set as a number. It was not a top 5 wide receiver or anything, but a real number 1 type talent on this team. Byron Pringle slots in essentially as your number 2 wide receiver, but he just suffered a quad injury. Was it late last week, I think? And they think he might miss 3 or 4 weeks. Again, they think he should be back by week 1, hopefully, is kind of the feeling from the team, but he's going to miss these training camp practices and preseason games to build that rapport with Justin Fields. So it might be a slower ramp up for him, that learning curve of like just the receiver and quarterback learning each other's timing once he does get back. But in his absence, it has been Equanimeous St. Brown who's really emerged. He's a guy that the Packers cut last season at the end of training camp, didn't keep him on their 53-man roster, but brought him back in the season. And offensive coordinator Luke Getsy said like he thought that adversity really kind of matured St. Brown and pushed him another level forward of just like, okay, like he all of a sudden he realizes he's got to work his butt off and really commit to doing this. So I think there's some high hopes that he can be, number 3, number 4 type wide receiver, nothing crazy. And then they drafted Velus Jones Jr. in the 3rd round out of Tennessee. He's kind of he's a wide receiver, but more of a gadget type of receiver, a really fast speed guy, but they're going to put him in the backfield sometimes like Deebo Samuel, but not nearly as good as Deebo Samuel, but that type of just find different ways to get the ball in his hands and don't ask him to be an elite route runner. Just manufacture those easy targets and let him make plays after the catch. So like those are definitely going to be like your top 4. N'Keal Harry, high ankle sprain, probably not going to make the 53. And then from there, it's a hodgepodge of kind of bouncing around guys at wide receiver.
Wow.
Daz, what about Daz? Daz going to make it?
So they've had some injuries now with other guys missing practice, and Daz has really stepped up. But he's got a shot because he's been doing some punt returning and some special teams, and that's going to matter a lot for that, number 5 and 6 wide receiver spots in there. He's got as good as a shot of anybody, but for me, it's completely wide open at this point.
So let's talk a little bit about the news that came out yesterday with Roquan Smith. So Roquan Smith requested a trade, and my Dolphins Twitter just completely blew up saying that the Dolphins should trade for him because we're desperate for a linebacker. That's like the weakest spot on our defense right now. What's going on with Roquan? Are they actually going to trade him?
I wouldn't rule it out. Roquan's he's a wild card right now. So Roquan does not have an agent, and that's what's making this so complicated. it's one-on-one negotiations between, front office and player. He's not getting necessarily like the regular agent advice on how to handle these situations. Not that I think he's taking that he's ruining it for himself. I mean, he should get as much money as he absolutely can. And I think he's been smart about not getting fooled by the Bears, because some of the reporting that's come out is that the Bears have kind of tried to pull a couple of fast ones on him in negotiations, that they sort of artificially inflated the value of a contract by putting backloading a bunch of money that they're never actually going to pay him. But then the per year average rises, but they know they're never going to pay him. And even without an agent, he's been able to kind of see through that and say, no, I'm not falling for that. Give me a real offer. And they've been kind of firm about it. And so he goes nuclear and kind of goes up to the media and says, hey, I'm requesting a trade. It's purely a contract thing and has nothing to do with the coaching staff or anything on the field. He and Eberflus in this defense, they all seem to get along really well, and they're still talking and almost like buds, the coaching staff and Roquan, they want him to be there. They've said they want him to be there. He's going to play the Darius Leonard role, the weak side linebacker. He's not going to be the middle linebacker when he's on the field. So he's not calling the plays. So it's not that big of a deal that he's missing practice at this point. I mean, eventually you want him out there, but he can kind of plug and play well. So I have a feeling now that this has kind of gone public, they're never going to send him to Green Bay. I can tell you that, Nathan. They do have some standards on whether.
I was gonna tell Nate it's gonna cost them J.R. Alexander and a first round pick.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers.
So if Roquan, obviously whatever happens, what does it mean for Morrow? Because Morrow's got the green dot this year, correct?
Yeah, he's calling the plays, and he's the middle of the field guy. They don't have a lot of great linebacker depth around him. I mean, it's a lot of guys that don't have much defensive experience, a lot of like career special teams guys and some undrafted free agents. I'm surprised they haven't gone out and signed any other veteran linebackers. They have some cap space that they've just been sitting on, and that's why I still feel like they seem pretty confident in getting a deal done either getting a deal done or Roquan just coming back to practice or coming back to the team and just accepting it. I don't think they're in any hurry to trade him, and I still think they can work something out. I do genuinely believe that they want him around. They're just trying to get as team friendly as a deal as possible. But at the end of the day, if he wants $20 million a year and you're at $18 million a year, does $2 million a year make a difference if he's the star in the middle of your defense? Like
no.
Either you want him and you pay him what he's worth, or you don't want him and you trade him. But like, you get off the pot, poop or get off the pot.
Yeah. Give that man the bag. He deserves it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can never argue with paying the player. Like if it's $2 million is the difference, like to an NFL team, for the most part, that's nothing.
Pocket
that's
change.
really nothing.
Yeah.
Yep. So what's going on with Tavon Young? He's coming off an ACL. They signed him to be the nickel cornerback. How's he been looking in camp coming back from his ACL?
Yeah, I was really excited for Tavon Young to come into camp and be a really like solid slot player as long as he's healthy. I mean, he hasn't been able to finish a season, so like I didn't know that he'd play all 17 games, but when he was on the field, like I was really excited about him as the slot option. And so far he practiced for a while there, and then he's been kind of banged up, just like minor stuff day to day. As far as I know from the ACL, like he's good to go and fully participating in that front. It's been other sort of nicks and bruises that have kept him out of practice, and he hasn't really been doing a lot, to the point now where Kyler Gordon, the second round pick that they drafted with their first pick in the draft, presumably to be the outside cornerback opposite Jalen Johnson, they've been putting Kyler Gordon in the slot in nickel and bringing in another outside cornerback. So like base defense, when it's two cornerbacks, it's still Gordon and Jalen Johnson. But as soon as they go into nickel, which is the majority of the time in this scheme, Kyler Gordon's almost a full-time slot player at this point, and they're bringing Kindle Vildor back off the bench as that other outside cornerback, and Tavon Young's kind of been a backup at this point. You would be very happy with him as a super high-quality backup, but I still feel like if you're trying to get your best three cornerbacks on the field in nickel, it's probably Gordon, Young, and Johnson. I just don't know that Young has been on the practice field enough to really solidify himself as that clearly third best cornerback there. But I don't think it's directly related to the ACL recovery. I think it's just sort of regular training camp wear and tear.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the draft, because we've talked about some of the players that have been drafted. The Bears. So when I was typing up the show notes and looking at what they did in the draft, it looks like they did a lot on the defense. So this is going to be, I think they're trying to play their defense as their strength.
Yes.
What did you like about what they drafted? Is there anybody that they drafted that you wish they would have took somebody else at that same position?
It was definitely when the draft went through that second round in particular. The Bears had 2 second-round picks from the Khalil Mack trade, but no first-round pick because they had given it up last year to trade up for Roquan Smith, for Justin B. But when they went through those 2 second-round picks, like Bears fans were hoping for a wide receiver and or an offensive lineman because those were the biggest holes on the roster entering this season. And 2 defensive backs back-to-back wasn't super popular. It was like, oh yeah, like Kyler Gordon seems pretty good and Jaquan Brisker seems pretty good, but it's that idea of like best player available versus need. And the feeling is from the fan base is always like, oh, I do want a little bit of that need. They really need a wide receiver. And like, especially George Pickens was kind of the one that Bears fans were in love with. And I know now at Steelers training camp, there keeps being these great reports of Pickens having these big catches down the field from Mitch Trubisky of all quarterbacks. And that one hurts a little bit. But like Ryan Poles, the GM, said after the draft, he's like, yeah, there were other players at other positions of need, but I felt like as general manager, I couldn't pass up on those 2 players and risk having them go off and be Pro Bowl players for another team and feeling like, oh, I reached for a wide receiver and offensive tackle just because we needed that more when I could have had 2 players that I just think overall have more talent. And as training camp and OTAs and stuff have gone on, it's been clear that like Kyler Gordon has been very good, and Jaquan Brisker, especially the safety, has been excellent. Like he has really been the more impressive of the 2. So I think a lot of the disappointment around the draft has faded for the most part, especially as Braxton Jones, the 5th round pick, has looked like a starting caliber offensive tackle in the 5th round, which we didn't necessarily think immediately coming out of the draft that a Southern Utah player would provide that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Brisker. I feel like he's gonna he's gonna be a starter, and obviously he's gonna rise up the rankings very fast. He's a big hitter. That boy can hit well.
They really like comparing with Eddie Jackson to try and get Eddie Jackson back to Eddie Jackson style because he's been with a lot of mediocre running mates that have, I think, taken more of his attention. Like he's kind of had to cover for his fellow safety the last couple of seasons, and maybe a rookie will need some help in that way too. But over time, Brisker should let Eddie Jackson freelance a little bit more and be a little bit more aggressive to go after the ball.
I agree 100%.
Go ahead, Nino. You got a question?
No. What we got here? So we covered. What are your thoughts on Tristan Ebner? I know we talked a little bit about that running game, but is he gonna like fill in that role for the gentleman that just got hurt again? I forget his name. He was your 3rd running back. He just tore his.
Tariq Cohen?
Yeah, I know he's not on there anymore, but
yeah,
is he going to take that role? Is that what they drafted him to be?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely the most receiver like running back, and he's also been on the kick return rotation. Entering training camp, I wasn't sure if he'd have a spot on the 53-man roster just as a 6th round pick. They signed one of Derrick Henry's backups, Darrington Evans from the Titans, and he's kind of always been that really good special teams blocker and number 3 type running back that you can rely on. And they signed the Titans fullback, Kari Blasingame, so that they had running back and fullback from Tennessee that they thought maybe would come to Chicago and be a good pair in this backfield. But Ebner has really played well at training camp, and Evans hasn't really done much to the point where Ebner's definitely pushing for a spot here. It's really going to come down to like, can he do more special teams than just be a return guy? Because Evans can cover down on the kickoff team and block on the kick return team and the punt return team too. So I don't know. I think they can get away with stashing Ebner, but he might be too good so far to keep off of this 53.
And if they put him, if they put him on the practice squad, there's a chance he could get poached as well.
Yeah, no exactly. Way. Too sneaky of a guy.
So let's circle back a little bit to Justin Fields. How much pressure is he under the season? Like, what are the expectations for Justin Fields, or at least what would the organization like to see as far as progress from him?
Yeah, it's interesting because the organization, publicly, verbally, in all aspects, is fully behind Justin Fields. They want to give him every chance to be successful. They want to build around him. They express all this confidence in him and want him to be the Bears' quarterback of the long term. But I just get the impression that with the way they've handled, the Roquan Smith situation and Tavon Jenkins, their 2nd round pick last year, there's trade rumors about him. This organization is not married to any player that they did not bring in themselves. And because Justin Fields is a carryover, I really do think, even if they won't say it and they're not acting like it, I think he has something to prove to them. Like if he has a bad season this year and the Bears are picking in the top 5, I don't think they would hesitate to draft another quarterback already, because Justin Fields was not their guy. They didn't pay that cost. That's a sunken cost for them. I don't think they're so committed and married to Justin Fields. Like I said, they're going to let him be as successful as he can be. And if he's good, they'll roll with him and they'll be all on board with Justin Fields as they say they are. But I just have this feeling that like they're not actually as married to him as they might want you to think. And so as a result, like there's no direct pressure from the organization, but at the same time, there feels like there's immense pressure to at least show good progress and good development. He doesn't need to throw for 4,000 yards and 35 touchdowns this season. It's just not as good of a supporting cast around him to be able to do that, but he needs to show improvement. He needs to show good command of the offense, because even if the receivers aren't great, is he getting the ball where it needs to be on time? Is he fixing some of the mistakes he made last year in terms of holding on to it a little too long and sometimes being a little bit too slow to go through his progression because he wanted to make the play with the first receiver? It's not that he's like can't read the defense. It's just like he at Ohio State, right? He wanted to make the big plays all the time. And sometimes in the NFL, you just have to take what's there, even if you wonder if maybe if I just hold on to it a little longer or wait for that receiver a little longer, the big play is going to be there, but then you end up getting sacked or fumbling or whatever it might be. And he's got to speed that process up. And if he can do those things, I think the organization will stay behind him 100%. And all the indications are he's sped up his throwing motion a little bit. He's cleaned up his footwork quite a bit. And the system is supposed to be very good for him. So it's trending in the right direction for Fields to have some pressure, but be relatively fine underneath it. But I do think if he just completely busts this season, they're not going to be patient with him beyond that. And they're going to start looking for other options.
So with all the changes that the Bears have had between last season and this season, and you just said that like they're not 100%, settled with Justin Fields. Like overall, what is the identity of this team, and what's it going to be? Is it just going to be one of those where their defense is their identity, or you're like what is the identity for the Bears?
Yeah, I think that almost ties in with this, where it's like they've said all along what we want to be is a physical running football team that plays really good defense. And it's interesting because you might think if this was like Justin Herbert with the Chargers, that the identity would be about the quarterback. But like the Bears' identity, yes, it's to make Justin Fields' job easier. But if he was the guy, wouldn't you like maybe trust him more and put more onus on him in the offense? Like it's kind of a double-edged sword there. It's like, yeah, you don't want to put too much on him and have him struggle, but if your whole focus is just making it easy on him, then do you trust him fully? Like so I kind of go back and forth on that, but they've been very clear on like, we want to run the ball as much as possible, play really good physical defense, generate turnovers, hustle, outwork you, be disciplined, and just be a smart, sound, solid football team. Oh, and also Justin Fields can be good too. But it's almost like that's the second afterthought and not the first part of the identity.
Real quick, back to Fields again. Well, what are your projections? Is 3,300, maybe 28-16 in the realm for him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm around like 3,000 or a little bit above, and then in the 20 to 25 touchdown range, and try and keep the interceptions to a minimum. Like I don't think he's going to lay it up, because I do think they really want to focus on running the ball. Like he'll have a fine season, but he's not going to be like a year-long top fantasy quarterback. I think he'll have big games here and there with some big performances, and other games where they feel perfectly comfortable running it 25 times, and he only needs 100, 150 yards passing in the game and just be efficient and sort of game manage a little bit. That's I think what they ideally want, and that could limit some of his production, but it might not necessarily be because he's not playing well. It's just because they don't want to ask him to have to do so much.
So in that respect, could Cole Kmet have a huge year, knowing that everything could stay short and they want to run the ball a lot?
Yeah, I really think he's going to be super critical to what they want to do on offense. When you can have a tight end that's a really good blocker and a good receiver, like that opens up so much. First, you need him to block in those stretch zone running games, so he's going to be on the field for all those. And then off play action, like if he's selling the run blocking and then slipping off behind them because they fear him as a blocker, he can then get behind the linebackers and be that middle of the field threat in that play action game. And same kind of thing, like in pass protection, he can help out there, or they can motion him out wide. And if he's a good enough blocker, then they have to bring other players into the box, but then he can be a receiver and get better matchups. There's there's a little bit of a buzz around Cole Kmet right now. They're really working on some new tools with him, and I think the Bears offense will go as far as he can take them. And we've seen Robert Tonyan have a lot of touchdowns in this offense, and certainly Kmet is no George Kittle, but it's a system that a tight end can do a lot of damage in.
So you mentioned his release has gotten a lot better. He's not holding on to the ball nearly as long. 58 sacks is what the Bears gave up this year, which is crazy number. We're not expecting them to give up another 50-plus sacks this year, are we?
No.
I know we talked a little bit about the line, but
yeah, I mean, so like 9 of those 58 sacks, and we're all on Justin Fields in his first career start. Like Fields was sacked 36 times, and 1/3 of those was in his first games, or 1/4 of those. Excuse me, math is not a math major, but like 20 was against the Cleveland Browns in his first game. I think it was 6 in the first half, and then 3 in the second half.
Yikes.
Because it was his first start, and they had no plan for him. It was Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett against a struggling Bears offensive line, and they didn't move the pocket. They didn't run much play action. They didn't leave tight ends in the chip. They just said, one-on-one pass blocking with your offensive tackles, and Fields either outrun them or do something, but like there was just no plan and no support. So like the coaching alone should reduce the sack number. And then I do think the offensive line has gotten better, especially with the signings that they just had, and this at least the 5th round pick as far as the draft picks looking pretty formidable this early in his career.
You got a question there, Nino?
No, I'm all on what he said. The sacks got to come down for Fields to go up.
Some of them was Fields' fault, right? Like some of them he did hold on to the ball too long, and there were plays when it's like he's scrambling out of the pocket and just throw it away. Like he takes the sack when he could have he's already outside the pocket, either get past the line of scrimmage or throw it away, but he trusted his legs a little too much. So he can do something to cut back on that too. But again, scheme, coaching, better offensive line should all help.
Like we spoke about earlier, he also had a guy that was out there just kind of picking at the grass and Allen Robinson, so it didn't really help him have an option to throw to.
Yeah, not a lot of open plays there. A lot of curl routes that are covered.
Yeah.
So what are your biggest concerns for this team going into 2022, and what are the team's best strength?
Yeah, I would have said if you had done this, 3 weeks ago before training camp, I would have said offensive line is biggest concern. I'm feeling a little better about that now. So I'll say pass rush, only because I don't know that Robert Quinn will finish the season as a Chicago Bear. I think by trade deadline, they'll move on from send him to a team like Von Miller happened last year, goes to the Rams when the Broncos kind of said, we're not making the playoffs. We're not tanking, but if we can get good value for him, I think eventually Robert Quinn is probably traded. And then they will have no one that has ever proven themselves as a pass rusher.
What about my boy Gibson?
I love Travis Gibson. He just has one season of where he pass rushed really well, but it was with Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn and Akeem Hicks and Eddie Goldman. And now, especially if Robert Quinn's gone, Travis Gibson is your number one pass rusher. And that's a lot bigger of a task. I think he's a very good player, and I think he'll have a good season, but it's a lot to ask of him when he has the Bears after Robert Quinn. He would lead the Bears in career sacks at like 7.5. Like no one else on the team has ever had more than 6 sacks in a season. So it's like there's not a lot of that proven pass rush production outside of Robert Quinn. And if they trade him, I think that's going to be a real concern. Otherwise, with Robert Quinn, definitely wide receiver after Darnell Mooney. They just need somebody to prove that they can consistently get open and be a playmaker for Fields. Biggest strength is definitely the secondary, though. The 2 rookies look great. They're really plug-and-play starters that are going to upgrade the secondary. That was a really big weakness last season. I think it'll make Eddie Jackson better. And this scheme in particular, compared to what they ran last year under Sean Desai, who was Vic Fangio's assistant, and that defense asks your secondary players to think a lot on the field, to read the concept and pattern match. Depending on what routes the receivers are running, you change your coverage based on what route they are. Matt Eberflus's defense is much more simple, and it's just – you're in cover 2 or whatever the play call is, eyes on the quarterback, go get the football. You don't have to think. You just play, read, react, be aggressive. And I think that'll help Eddie Jackson. It'll help the cornerbacks. It'll be much more instantaneous for them. It might be too simple sometimes, and sometimes offenses can take advantage here and there, but I still think it's going to be a better system for the secondary and a lot more talent infused there too.
All right. So I got a question. It's something that just came to me. We talked about how Roquan Smith has requested a trade. You talked about possibility that they may trade Quinn. We talked about how they're if they end up with a top 5 pick, like there's a good chance that they will take a quarterback because Fields is clearly not going to be the answer. I just looked it up. The Bears right now are $93 million under the salary cap going into next year, which is an astronomical amount. What are the odds that with this new regime, new GM, new head coach, if the Bears come out this year and they do, let's say they end up with like a number 3 overall pick, what are the odds they just completely blow this team up? Anybody like the veterans or anybody that's been there for a while that are not the prime position players, like the secondary players that you mentioned, that they just blow this up, trade everything away for future assets, and start from scratch?
So they started to kind of half do that this season, and you can only do so much in one offseason, but like that's been the long-term plan here is create a bunch of cap space for next offseason, assemble draft capital, and really get their guys in there. I mean, they weren't able to trade away much besides Khalil Mack, but they let Akeem Hicks go. They cut Danny Trevathan. They cut Tariq Cohen. They let Allen Robinson walk. They moved on from some of the veteran offensive linemen that they had brought in. And the defense, I mean, Eddie Jackson was kind of like the only veteran who's been around a little while that has gotten held over, and he's now their most expensive player. And it wouldn't surprise me if this was his last season in Chicago. If he has another ho-hum good but not great season. I mean, he's a $17 million safety right now, and he hasn't played like one since 2018. So like if he has another okay season, I could see him gone, and there's another $15 million in cap space. And then they have all this money to sign big name free agent receivers. If it's for Justin Fields or whoever your quarterback is, sign another big offensive lineman or two, get another pass rusher in there. And I mean, like they'll have money and they'll have assets. And especially if they end up shedding a little bit more in the season, it's a big turnover plan. I think Matt Eberflus said at one of the press conferences that the Bears have a higher percentage of new players this training camp than any other team in the NFL. They've had already the most turnover of any team this offseason. And I think it'll continue a little bit more next year, but this year is all about figuring out, okay, all the guys we brought in on 1-year deals and all the holdovers, show us whether you belong for the long term or don't. And that includes Fields, that includes Cole Kmet, that includes Eddie Jackson, and it might include Roquan Smith if they can't reach out a deal.
Okay, now, what is the start number before the button gets pressed to evaporate? Is it like 2-6 and then we're just opening the floodgates?
I don't think there's a win-loss. I don't think they're really that concerned about a specific win-loss number. I mean, I think they either already plan on trading Robert Quinn or they don't. It's not about like, if the team is good, all of a sudden they're going to change their mind and keep him. Because I just think they're realistic that they're never going to say that they're not competing for the playoffs, but they know this is probably not a playoff team already. So then at that point, if you're 2-6 versus 3-5 or 4-4, like I don't think it makes a big difference to them. I think they in their mind they will have a trade price tag that would say, hey, we'll trade Robert Quinn if someone will give us this level of draft pick. A second and a third like Von Miller got, absolutely. I think they would take that in a heartbeat. So, but if no one offers that, then they'll keep him. They can afford him. They'll use him. They'll play him out the rest of the season and try and trade him in the offseason or whatever it might be. But I think the same kind of thing could happen with Roquan Smith too. It's just like, well, if a team will give us the price tag, then sure, but we're not in a hurry to get rid of these guys. But we'll do what's best in our interest for the long term, kind of regardless of how good or bad they are on the win-loss schedule. But their schedule is easy enough on paper. A lot of non-playoff teams, they play the Jets and the Falcons and the Lions twice, of course, and the Texans. Like they play some teams that are not expected to be good. So they should have like 4 or 5 cakewalk wins, and then it's a matter of can they steal 1 or 2 and get to 6 or 7 wins, maybe. But that's about where I think they're going to be at.
So being a Dolphins fan, like going out winning 6 or 7 games every year, like that just killed me as a fan because you're not good enough to make the playoffs, but you're not bad enough to get one of those top prime draft picks. So that's why when we went through and blew everything up in 2019 and 2020 season, like as a fan, yeah, okay, I understood that we're going to be a really bad team for a year or two, but it has paid off in the long run. And I kind of just wish Chicago would commit one way or the other. Well, it seems like they're trying to play the middle there with, we don't really want to blow it up, but we're not good enough to win yet.
Yeah, I think that all comes down to Justin Fields, right? That's the answer for, like, he answers the question for them. They don't have to decide, do we blow it up or do it not? Because Justin Fields will either blow it up or not. Like if he's bad, he will blow it up for them. And if he's good, then they don't need to blow it up because they've already got their quarterback. So it's almost it's a little bit genius in that way where they can kind of just sit back and say, all right, let's see what Fields is. If he's good, great. We've got our quarterback. We don't need to blow it up. We'll use our free agents and our draft pick to build around him. And if Justin Fields is bad, then he kind of blew it up for us. And all of a sudden we're drafting in the top 5. We get another quarterback and we've done the full rebuild. So it's a good spot to be in as a general manager. It's just a matter of figuring out whether this general manager has the goods to properly identify the right talents to build around the quarterback, or if he needs to identify a new quarterback, can he pick a good quarterback, which is the big unknown here.
All right. Now it's time for the hardest question of the show. Can we get a Bears end of season record?
Yeah, it's tough because this is such a volatile team. Like we said, with Justin Fields, they'll go as far as he can go. But yeah, the number 7 you flashed up there is kind of what I've been coming back to around. Like when I look at this Bears schedule, I kind of mentioned some of the teams. Like they should easily beat the Texans. They should easily beat the Falcons. They should easily beat the Jets. I think there's one more in there that I always skip over. The Giants.
It's probably the Patriots. They should easily beat the Patriots if they play them.
No, it's the Dolphins. That's who it is. They play both of those teams, and they should easily beat both of them, right?
Thank you. I'll take that one back. I appreciate you, Lorin. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. There's at least like 4 games that are like, yeah, in Penn. If you lose those games, something went really, really wrong. So then it's like, can they get 1 or 2 wins against the mediocre teams? Like, I don't know if the 49ers will be that good or not. Maybe they could beat them. Maybe they lose. I don't know if the Giants will be that good. Maybe they could beat them. Maybe they won't. Washington Commanders, middle of the pack. They play the Lions twice. Maybe you can get one of those. The Eagles, will they be good? Will they not be good? So like, there's enough of those teams that are question marks that if the Bears can win 1 or 2 of those question marks, plus the 4 or 5 that are already probably pretty easy wins, then that gets you into your 6-7-ish win range. But I don't think they're going to be like 9-10 pushing for the playoffs or anything.
All right. That's fair. That's very fair. I'm good with my questions. Nino, did you have any more, my friend?
The only other question I had was we touched on the wide receivers and the injuries. Is there any buzz on a guy that they could bring in, like a Will Fuller or anything like that? Are you hearing anything in camp?
I don't, as far as free agents go, I don't think so. I think if they're going to bring in a receiver, it might come from a trade from another team that for a guy that the other team was going to cut anyway, kind of like N'Keal Harry, like, except Harry's kind of done for, so let's try it again with someone else's player. Because the Bears this offseason brought in Dante Pettis from the Giants, Tajay Sharp from the Falcons, David Moore from the Seahawks. Like a lot of these guys that were free agents that were kind of like end of the roster guys, you bring them here and see if they can do more in Chicago. And I don't know that there's very many current free agent wide receivers that offer them a lot more. Like, yes, I think Will Fuller is better than those guys, but does Will Fuller want to come to the Chicago Bears? Right. Probably not. Or like same with like Emmanuel Sanders, or for a while like Julio Jones was out there. It's like, no, he's not going to come to the Chicago Bears. So I think the free agents that are available probably aren't going to fit where the Bears are in the team building strategy. But you look around to other rosters, certainly like if Jalen Reagor for the Eagles was available, but probably less likely. But Darius Slayton from the Giants, Denzel Mims from the Jets, maybe Andy Isabella from the Cardinals. Some Bears fans have said Preston Williams from the Dolphins. Maybe if he's the odd man out there, get a big body in Chicago. I don't think
he probably is the odd man out. Eric Izukama has been just lighting it up in training camp. He's lighting it up.
So I have a feeling one of the Bears wide receivers week 1 is not currently on the roster right now, but I think he comes from I think he's currently on another team's roster and not a free agent.
You know, fun fact about Iguzama is he was number 2 last year in college for most yak yards, and your guy Willis Jones was number 1, which is crazy.
Yep. So do you think the Bears will trade for a player, or you think they're going to wait and till teams have to do the roster cuts to get down to 53 and just sign one?
I think either way it's going to be late in training camp. I think if they were going to trade for somebody from another team, they would have already. And I think it's too early in training camp where if they go to the Dolphins and ask about Preston Williams, the Bears say, hey, like, we'll give you a 7th round pick. And they say, well, no, we don't know for sure whether we want to give up on Preston Williams yet. We're still finishing our battles. But once it gets to be August 25th and cut down days are a couple days away and the team is already going to cut him anyway, maybe you trade for him a few days early, get him into your roster so you can evaluate him and not compete with him as a free agent after all the cutdowns have been done, especially after N'Keal Harry's injury. That's more the path I see. But I could see them waiting for players to get cut too. But I don't think we'll see a trade immediately unless there's a big injury at wide receiver. Like another player has a longer term injury, like, you know, if heaven forbid Darnell Mooney, but like Equinemius St. Brown or Velus Jones is out for 6 weeks. Maybe they pull the trigger now and up their price tag. But I think for now, they're still content figuring out what they have with their guys and poaching someone later on.
Now Harry's a high ankle, correct?
Yes, but I think it might be 6 weeks on the high ankle. So that takes you like week 1, week 2. So they could put him on the PUP list or the IR, but then he hasn't been practicing. So when you activate him, do you want him back on your 53 if you haven't seen if he's a fit for you or not? So maybe they'll do the full year IR and just stash him and bring him back next year on a futures deal and bring him back to training camp and kind of run through the whole gamut again. But I don't know that he's going to make an impact this season. We'll see.
So I think, Nino, I'm out of questions. How about you? You got anything left?
No. On that note, I have nothing left to ask. I think you were a phenomenal guest. You gave us so much knowledge on the Bears. Yeah. I feel like now I can actually battle people in the NFC on I'm in the wrong division, but in that division, I apologize, and contend with Bears, information.
Hey,
can you plug? With the last time we got here, can you plug yourself and find out where we can find you and what you got going on?
Sure, of course. Yeah, like you said at the top, the Locked On Bears podcast is 5 days a week on the Locked On Podcast Network, wherever you find those podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Cox Sports One. It's like Fox Sports One, but with a C is how I always tell people. And doing some grading for Pro Football Focus on the side. That's more behind the scenes stuff, so you don't see as much of that. But I'm always dabbling around in the Bears Twitter and the Bears media world and podcasts and stuff here and there. So, happy to be on and happy to bring on any kind of Bears talk you need. I'm here for it.
And we, like I said earlier, we greatly appreciate you coming on. This has been an absolutely fantastic show. Your knowledge is absolutely second to none. Nino, why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, my friend?
All right. You know the deal, guys. We can find us Towards Titles on the YouTube, on the Twitter. We got it on the Apple Podcasts, on the Spotify, and it's the big one on the Patreon. There's 5 levels, but I tell everybody it's the 5th level is about you, where you can get inside analytics from us. Anyone at Total Titles will help you with draft reviews, trade questions. You can just hit us up in the DM or email us, So that's the 5th tier. Check it out. And once again, thank you, Lorin. And good luck with the Chicago Bears this year, Georgie. And we're out.
All right, let's do it. Thank you, guys.